We are Hellcat swapping a 2001 Dodge Viper RT10. Time is running out because we need to get this thing running to Roadkill Nights event in Michigan. So let's get this engine in and get this thing fired up.
All right, I have back from Diablo Sport Tuning our ECU for the Viper. Now it's time to unsheath it and figure out how we're gonna mount this up in the engine bay. I think right underneath the windshield, and probably have a heat barrier between this and the motor. We're gonna isolate this so the vibration doesn't get to it, but that needs to be mounted in this thing now. So I've done my mounting plate. So now that I have this fastened to that, we're gonna go ahead and fasten this plate itself to the chassis with some isolated mounts that Mickey has just floating around in his drawer.
We're gonna start assembling the Redeye engine for the last time to go in the engine bay, and hopefully after this we won't have to take it back out ever. Our boys at ACT came through and gave us a sick twin plate clutch for this thing with flywheel included. So we can start assembling this, pilot bearing on, we can put our twin plate clutch assembly on. I can put the slave, which is this guy, in our new T56 Magnum transmission, and then mate the engine and transmission for the last time.
All right, so I want to address something that I saw a ton in the comment section, which is on the motor mounts that the welding looked a little bit cold. And I forgot to mention to Quinn that we definitely wanted to do 2 or 3 passes on MIG welding for the engine mounts. So I had Will clean this up. Quinn had done just a quick spray paint job just to get them all mounted in. And I'm gonna go over all of the welds with our MP210. And we're gonna do, I would say, I think probably 3 passes total to make sure that the welds are good and strong. So that's it. The motor mounts now have 3 passes on all the core joints, and maybe not the most beautiful thing, but I know it's super strong and definitely will not have to worry about anything with the motor mounts. So a huge shout out to you guys for kind of catching that in the comment section. Unfortunately, not everything always makes the episode, but just know we're doing our best here and we're trying to get this thing done. So let's get after it.
The last thing we're gonna be doing to this engine is upping the power. So we have 2 parts we're gonna be installing. The first one is a Supercharger Pulley by our friends over at Medco. And we're gonna be running D-Schwartz injectors again like we did last year. We are running full E85 on this thing, so it's gonna make a lot of power. I gotta take the supercharger off to install the new pulley, so let's get this engine dropped down and take it apart. If you haven't already, make sure to subscribe to the throtl YouTube channel and turn on the bell notification so you don't miss a thing. Supercharger, root style. So you have 2 rotors. Kind of think of them like, almost looking like airplane propellers, except they mesh and then they twist as they come down. That's pretty much what these are. So as the air, it comes in through here. If you look over here, this is where your throttle body is. So this is the low pressure zone. So this is the air intake. So it goes in here. If you look in there, there's few little air intakes like inside there where the air comes in. And then these rotors spin, and these things are spinning fast as F, and then they get compressed and the air gets hot. So the air comes through the intake, comes through the supercharger, comes up into this area here, which is where that cover is. From there, it splits off to the side, These are your water to air radiators to cool the air charge. And then from there they go straight down into the intake runners. So this acts as the manifold, the intake manifold for the car. So there's your fuel injector ports, and that's pretty much it. That's how this supercharger setup works. Just like any part of any Mopar build, it's time for the big hammer.
This one?
That one.
Or is that your new nickname?
Woo-hoo. Luckily, last year when we built our Challenger Redeye, the boys over at Mecco actually sent us pretty much everything we needed to do the install, and we still have it, which is awesome. So we're using the same Allen keyway and their Supercharger Puller kit, which is really nice. So this actually holds the rear of the snout. So if you want to upgrade the pulley on one of those, first of all, you got to pull the charger off, and you got to get this out, which is the snout of a supercharger. And that goes there, like that. And that actually allows you to hold the pulley in place from the front. There we go. Snout without a pulley. So we're going to be installing their 2.85 pulley. We also have a 2.7 pulley. If we decide we need more power, we can switch it up to that.
So smaller radius means it's spinning faster.
Exactly.
And compresses faster.
Yep. So stock pulley, Medco Motorsports 2.85 pulley. So by changing the pulley size, one rotation of the crank has more rotations of the supercharger than on the stock one. This thing ain't fitting with the hood on. So this hood, this nice Viper hood is about to get.
Ow.
Sorry. Not.
Did I make you do that?
No.
Yeah, Mickey's gonna do that.
Why are we gonna let Mickey have that fun?
If we,
Will wants to do it?
if we do that, Mickey's gonna have a cow.
Oh yeah, that's
Anyway.
definitely a Mickey job.
Shout out to Easters for sending us all the fuel parts for this thing, including these 1100cc injectors. These things are beautiful. They worked like an absolute charm last year, and they're gonna work like an absolute charm this year. If you guys wanna pick up some DishWorks injectors, head over to throtl.com, pick some up for yourself. So last night we got our injectors set up. We put 1100s in. Now after having a chat with the boys over at DishWorks, they recommended more injector is better. So we're actually gonna drop 1500s in here, and then we're gonna tune it for that. So luckily they sent us a set of 1500s and the 1100s we just put in. So swapping these out is gonna be super quick. Our T56 Magnum is bolted back onto the Hellcat engine, which is sick. There's only one last thing we need to do before we can put the engine and transmission package back into the Viper, and that is install the short shift kit that we got for this car. So this is a quick stick shifter by Race Tuning. This is not only gonna be an improved shifter over the stock shifter, it's a little bit of a shorter throw. It also has this offset, this kick to the side, and we need that for the Viper because the T56 that came out of it had a kickoff to the side. Now Mickey did the measurements, and this shifter should allow us to put our new shifter in the exact same spot as the original shifter, means we can use the factory boot, the factory center console, and all that stuff. So I'm actually gonna take the kick off of the shifter right now because I don't want this kind of in the way and banging around in the transmission tunnel as we put this on. So once the transmission is in, we'll reinstall this, get it tight, and then we can finish out our shifter from there.
Well, we are moving on to the oil cooler now. Quinn got this all fabbed up. Oil cooler's in its location, and we got all the fittings. So we're basically adapting the factory oil sandwich block to provide oil and take oil back from our oil cooler. So this is the new location for the oil cooler. This is what we're working on here. We've got two -12 45s, and we've got two -12 90s that are gonna run down, just like that, underneath the alternator. Should provide good cooling through our CSF heat exchanger.
So I'm making the last fuel line. So now that we have the motor in, I've got our fittings to adapt to the Mopar rail. So this is PTFE line. This is the same stuff we use for the entire fuel system. We've got our fuel pressure regulator right here. We've got our fuel rail there. I need to make a line to connect them, and then we will be completely done with the fuel system.
So he says.
Oh, really?
That's what he says. So yeah.
Boom. That is, we got the ECU mounted. Now we have the motor harness and the body harness connected together. Our ECU is plugged in.
So our accessory drive kit came for the Cat engine, which included the alternator and this power steering pump, which is actually really cool. So all of the cars from factory that have these Hellcat engines in them all have electric steering racks. So the Trackhawk, the Hellcats themselves, everything has electric racks. So this is actually a part specifically made for this swap kit to retrofit these Hellcat engines into older chassis. It's exclusively through Dodge for Hellcat swaps into older chassis, which is really nice.
We're gonna remove a spark plug from every cylinder so that we can turn the motor over by hand to release the compression. Spark plug.
50% right, 50% right. So what we're doing is we're gonna oil prime the engine. So we replaced the oil pan, we replaced the pickup, we have a fresh oil filter, we have this fresh cooler. None of this stuff has oil in it. We don't even have oil in the engine yet. So what I don't want to happen is you start the engine runs, and it's putting stress on the rod bearings and the main bearings and the cam bearings, and everything that needs oil is going to be starved for oil until the oil pump can fill the pickup tube, then pump it through the block, fill the oil filter all the way up, come through this line, fill the entire cooler up on the way back, fill this line up, and then it gets into the engine through the galleries, and then it finally gets to the main and rod bearings. That's a really good way to destroy a brand new engine. It's also a very good way to spin a bearing out of the gate, and it's not really ideal. So what we're gonna do is take all of the plugs out of the entire engine so we have no compression building, which means those are gonna have very minimal stress on the connecting rod bearings when we spin this engine over. We're gonna fill the oil cooler and the oil cooler lines and the oil filter up with oil, giving it a much better chance of getting the oil throughout the engine a lot faster. And when we have good oil pressure, then we'll put all of our spark plugs in, we'll plug in all of our fuel injectors. The engine should fire and start right up with good oil pressure, which is what we want. So I'm having Greg pull all the plugs out. We're gonna keep jamming, and then eventually this thing will fire up.
I only jumped in here because you left. Spark plug.
So we're gonna start our oil priming expedition here. I'm gonna start by filling our oil filter up. We're gonna be using some 300V Racing Motul engine oil. So it'll do the job just perfect. Woo. So drain and fill with this pan is about 7 quarts, but total capacity, when you do an oil change on your car, if your car's already been running and it's not on a fresh motor, you have oil in the filter galleries and the cylinder head and the lines and all that stuff. We have a completely bare dry engine, so it's probably gonna take about 1.5 quarts more than 7 would be my initial guess. So that's why we're filling everything up. I'm gonna add 7 in the pan. We're gonna fire it up and hope for the best.
Cooler's full.
There's no dipstick.
Cooler's full?
Completely full.
Good, okay. So,
Dipstick.
there's no dipstick. We don't have a dipstick. Yeah. Yeah, no, we're just, as long as it has oil pressure, we're good. So, we'll find out.
Hey, well, we haven't checked in a while. What are you up to?
Yeah.
I am doing temporary taps into the starter relay control and the ignition relay control and clutch pedal interlock. So it wants to see a ground on the clutch pedal, and we need, when the key's fully turned to crank, that needs to see 12 volts, and then when you let it go just to ignition run, it needs to keep a constant 12 volts until you turn the key out.
All right, I removed the water neck from the front of the Hellcat motor because it goes the wrong direction. It actually spits out this way, and our pickup for our radiator is over here. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna cut it off. We're gonna reuse the bolt-up flange, and I'm gonna lop it here, and I'm gonna lop it here. We're gonna get rid of this neck, basically. We're gonna re-weld this onto the face so it comes straight out. I'm actually gonna give it a little angle towards the driver's side of the car. I've been in Japan too long. That's the passenger side over there. We'll weld that back on. That should solve our problem for the top radiator pipe. Typically, I would just lop this off, weld on a -20, and make a -20 coolant line. But with us being under such a time crunch, this is actually just way easier, and we can just use rubber hose off the shelf rather than trying to source -20 hose right now at the 11th hour. Alright, so we'll be able to reuse this flange. I'll go ahead and clean this up, make it nice and smooth and flat. It'll be a good weld surface. And then what we're gonna do is essentially weld this back on there. And that's gonna give us the outlet we need to plumb this Hellcat engine to our Viper radiator.
So I'm back on the Lincoln Electric TIG 225. Mickey and the guys are modifying the upper water neck where the thermostat mounts because of just how our radiator is going to be set up. We ended up cutting this off. This elbow is 90 degree, and we're going to be welding this straight to the flange. So should be a way cleaner look. It'll allow us to make our radiator hoses quite a bit easier. Now before I do that, Mickey explained we've got to like kick this up just a hair. So I'm going to do a little tack on the bottom. It'll kind of angle this just a tiny bit, and then we'll go ahead and put a weld all the way around and make sure it's perfectly sealed. So as I mentioned, today we're going to be using the Lincoln 225. So I've got a pretty small cup here on my torch. We've got our amperage set to about 140. Put a little bit of post flow on here and turn the AC balance just to auto. What I like about this machine is everything is pretty easy to set up. It literally takes 2 to 3 minutes, and I have really good results with this machine. So we've got everything ready to go. So let me grab my pedal. We'll get started.
So I've got a majority of the very critical components back on the front end, such as the radiator support, radiator fan, our hood latch assembly, and the front bash bar. So now we can finish routing our lines for the power steering, the radiator system, and the charge cool system. Mickey's working on our upper and lower hoses right now, which is a super huge critical thing for this. So this is our starter. So as soon as this is bolted down and wired up, all we gotta do is put transmission fluid in the trans to make sure nothing bad happens to the trans when we start it up, and then pretty much that's it. Test the fuel system, prime it, start it. There you go. Can't see it. So we are going to start the procedure to get this thing fired up. So we got the battery reconnected. Right now I'm going to key on. We should have the factory fuel pump run. It's going to fill up the surge tank. That's going to fill up. We should see fuel pressure on this little gauge right here. So maybe you can watch that, Greg. On top of that, we're going to be checking for fuel leaks, make sure none of the AN lines are leaking. If we have good fuel pressure, we're probably going to have to adjust it because I don't know what this regulator is set at. From there, if we have good fuel pressure, good fuel, everything's not leaking, then we can crank the engine to get oil pressure. And once we have oil pressure, then we'll put our plugs back in, put our coils on, put our ignition coils back in, plugged on, get our fuel injectors plugged in, and then go for first start. So a little bit of a procedure. It's to ensure everything is working correctly and that we don't damage the engine on first start, and then we will start the engine. So let's go. Ready?
Fuel pump is on. Fuel pump is on.
Zero pressure.
So you key it on, it runs for like a second or two. That's probably gonna take forever to fill the surge tank up full of fuel. So I think we're just gonna fill the surge tank ourselves with some gas and kind of kickstart the process going. So we're gonna fill it up.
I'm taking air out of it.
Okay, so we were just trying to fuel prime it to see if we could get rail pressure. We didn't get anything. He was bleeding air out of the rail. So we're just gonna crank it to build oil pressure and see if the fuel pump will catch up with everything else. So it was a little bit unsuccessful today. So what I suspect happened was the way the surge tank's set up is the stock fuel pump from the stock fuel tank feeds the surge pump. Since we disconnected all the stock Dodge harness for the ECU for the Viper motor, I think those wires got lost in translation, so I don't think our stock pump, which is now our lift pump, I don't think it's getting voltage. Because of that, our surge tank isn't filling up, and because of that, we're not getting any fuel pressure to the rail. So we tried to pour some fuel into the surge tank, but I don't think the fuel we poured in was close to enough to get this whole thing running, because it has to not only fill the surge tank, but the lines all the way to the engine, fuel pressure regulator, and all the way back. And we'll get this figured out tomorrow. So as we found out yesterday, and what my suspicion was actually turned out to be correct, which is that the in-tank pump is actually triggered not by Keon, but by the ECU, the factory Dodge Viper ECU. We don't have that anymore, so turning the key on does nothing to run the stock fuel pump. So we just did some diagnosing on it. He figured out what wires we need, so he has a little bit of wiring to do to run that to key on 2 like it needs. We tested it. That lift tank pump is actually working now, which is good. So we should have adequate fuel pressure with key on now. So Will's gonna wire that up, and then we're gonna start the process all over again.
Going in, boys.
We got fuel pressure, which is good.
Perfect. All right, I like what I see, Quinn. Tossing in the spark plugs, huh?
Going for a start.
You ready, bud?
Are you guys ready? This thing is gonna be freaking loud, baby. All right, there we go. We have one live, hot and ready Hemi engine. Spark plugs are back in, ignition coils are plugged in, and the fuel injectors are plugged in. We're ready for first start.
Yep.
So we're checking fuses. When Quinn goes to crank, the fuse for the start run is dropping out. It gets 0 volts, and then we wanted to make sure that the ECU was still getting power while we were cranking. And it drops down to 10.3, which might be a little low for what it wants to see.
What are we doing?
Staying at 11 at least.
If it's above 10, the ECU is good.
Did it stop itself?
No. I put it on the on position and it was cranking by itself.
Well, let's see if it starts.
No, he says on.
The starter will never shut off.
Try it. It dropped Drop down to 9 something. There's a lot that we have tried. So now I'm gonna reference this sweet packet here. We're gonna check our camshaft and crank position sensor and make sure our sensors are good, make sure our wires are good all the way back to the ECM. See where it goes from there.
Riding grounds because we hope that'll fix the problem. It probably won't, but it's a good thing to do anyway, so. We don't know why it won't start. We got no fuel, we got no spark. Diablo Sport's on the East Coast and they're closed. Dodge is on the East Coast, so they're also closed. It's 6 o'clock, and we're just adding grounds and laying on the ground.